You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Welcome back to the Climate Conversations. I'm Kong Man Jing, but some of you may know me better as BioGirl MJ. I was formerly a science teacher and now I host a science and environment channel on social media called Just Keep Thinking. We're kicking off with a new limited series that I'm guest hosting called My Green Gig. I'll speak to people who are in some unconventional jobs, specifically green jobs, and find out what they do at work. Today, I'm going to have a conversation about birds with a passionate birder, which I just realized is a legit word to describe someone who observes birds as a hobby. He is Movin Nyanasengeran, a PhD student researching on bird conservation at NUS, and he is also a friend of mine. Hello, Movin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Man Jing. Thanks so much for having me here.
It's been a while, and I love your shirt. He's on theme today, guys.
Yeah, I'm just wearing my bird shirt. So it's got a bunch of birds on it along with like monstera and stuff
Pineapples.
Like that. Yes, pineapples.
Okay, so I must confess, when you first told me that you wanted to study birds, I was like, huh? Birds? Because you did your final year project in university on freshwater fish, which is very different from a flying bird, right? So what triggered your interest in our feathery friends?
Okay, this is actually a question I get asked a lot. So first of all, hi everyone, my name is Movin. Man Jing already introduced me. And the thing is, we actually went to school together. So we did our undergrads together. We were in labs that were just
in the
adjacent.
Same lab.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
Keep
We're just
bumping
like
to each other and
exactly.
hey.
Good times, throwback, right? But anyway, so I came into university being very passionate about fish, I guess, freshwater fish, because I kept freshwater fish. I like going and scooping, like looking at fish wherever I go. But I'd always been really interested in birds because I used to travel with my family and I'm super into nature. And the most obvious thing that you get to see oftentimes when you are in these places are birds, basically, because they're always flying around. And then it becomes a question of like, I want to know what that species is because I want to know what I'm looking at. It's like my neurotic self just being like, I want to categorize, I want to know what that thing is. And with birds, you get a lot of references. Like you have a lot of field guides and things like that to help you identify the birds. Not so much with other species, actually, I think. And things like frogs, lizards, mammals, they're all so much harder to look at and observe also because they're so much rarer. They're often much shyer as well. So that's kind of where that thing started. So I was already a bird watcher back in the university days. But after that, I wanted to go into grad school. And I wanted to do stuff that was not so... Because remember, we did so much ecology work when we were in undergrad, right? We were going out to the field, getting the data in the sites, and then coming back
and then being stuck with our laptops.
I know.
looking at the data for
Exactly.
hours.
So I decided, you know what? Why not? I love being stuck with my laptop. So I want to do that even more. So I'm going to go and learn genetics, right? I just want to sit in front of my computer and code it. So like in NUS, the best genetics professor happens to be a bird guy, right? So it kind of made sense. I mean, I already like birds and I wanted to get like a new skill set under my belt. And so it kind of made sense to try it. And I managed to get a position in the university for the PhD. And then here I am, I guess, studying birds.
I did not know this story. But was there a point in your life where you realized that, hey, I want to become a bird conservationist and I'm going to make this my career?
I think it's never really been a single moment. It's been more of like a process, I think. So right after undergrad, I was consulting for a while. I went back to do research assistant. Then I worked in conservation in the IUCN for a little bit. So like this thing called the Asian Species Action Partnership for a little while. And it was a very eye-opening experience because it really let me see what conservation planning looks like. So for those of you who don't know, the IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they're kind of like one of the major groups that spearheads conservation throughout the world, and they have a whole bunch of different subgroups and committees that do a lot of this conservation planning and then translate these plans into actions on the ground, right? So when I was there, I realized I like conservation action, but I'm also very interested in this whole conservation planning aspect of it, right? Like the big picture stuff. What are the big things we need to put in place in order to safeguard all of nature?
You need to have a good plan before the action.
Exactly. I mean, like with most things, right? But I think what we fail to realize, at least what I fail to realize with conservation is that not only do you need to know your stuff, not only do you need to know things about like animals, plants, nature, how your organism behaves, but it's also kind of like really a study of people as well. Because people are the ones who are putting these things in danger, but at the same time, people are the ones saving these things as well. So convincing people to change the way that they view certain things can always be beneficial. So if people are always hunting a certain species, that means they're very good at finding that bird, for instance. if they realize that, hey, bird watchers would pay a fair bit of money to come and see this bird, and I can show them this bird because I'm so good at finding it, then instead of selling the bird one time as a dead animal, right, you can keep selling the same bird multiple times to people, right? So you change the way that they think about the resource that they have. And so that was kind of like the interesting thing for me, right? How do we change mindsets and how do we reorientate that in a way that is like a win? Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of it is really about creative problem solving almost. And that aspect of conservation was really what excites me about it, which is that it's not just about the nerdy parts of it. Like, I mean, which we both love, right? Like being nerds is like in our blood. We love it. But at the same time, there's also this whole people aspect to it, which I'm sure as extroverts, we can both kind of relate to, right? Which is the meeting, engaging with people, and also getting to listen to people, find out more about people. And that's kind of been the driving force behind this whole thing.
Yeah, you get inspired and you inspire others as well. You're changing
you
livelihoods
hope,
also.
right?
Yeah.
That you hope that you can make a change that way. So then after that, I realized like if I want to be involved in conservation planning, it's either 15 years of experience or getting a PhD. And for once, getting a PhD is the quicker option.
Oh.
Which it very rarely is the case,
rarely
right?
Is the case.
So, and then I was like, okay, back to grad school. And here I am, I guess.
And, just like every job, there's always the good and not so good parts to it, right? What's the most rewarding part of the work that you do?
I have a moment to tell you. Okay, so basically...
share it with me.
Okay, so basically... part of my work for PhD involves like a lot of field work, which means I go out to get DNA from birds. Rest assured, guys, we don't hurt the birds at all. It's just like a drop of blood. Birds are released completely unharmed. And so what I study is understanding why species are distributed the way they are in the region, right? So my work is really centered in Southeast Asia. I do a lot of genetic work to study that. So I'm studying how many species we have in the region, what are the distributions of these species and things like that. And to learn the distributions of these species and to get these samples, the fieldwork takes me some pretty amazing places. And there's this place like we recently visited in the Philippines, in the southwest, in the island of Mindanao, called this place called Lake Holon, and it's gorgeous. So I think one of the best things about the job is like the places it takes me. We were sitting at this ridge, just overlooking. So we were camped at this ridge, just overlooking this beautiful, crystal clear blue lake, and it was gorgeous. And it was one of those moments where you look down and you're like, you know what? Life is good. Life is good. Pretty good.
It's worth it. PhD is fine.
Yeah, of course, PhD isn't always easy. There's always a lot of challenges. And I'm sure any PhD student can tell you that. But it's like moments like that when you're like, you know what? When you feel super centered and you're looking out and you see the world and you look at nature and you're kind of like, yeah, this is what I'm doing this for.
Oh my God, this sounds amazing. Speaking about observing birds, we do have a pretty big and huge birding community here in Singapore.
We do.
Yeah,
we definitely do.
What are the people like, in this birding community? And I've seen before groups of uncles and aunties with bazooka cameras around. I mean, I'm one of them, like once in a while. Yeah, but some people have that notion that it is like an old people activity.
Well, okay, that's actually a really good question because I think the birding community in Singapore is really, really, like you said, it's massive. But because of the fact that it's massive, I think in part of that, it's also highly diverse. Yeah, of course, you get your fair bit of uncles and aunties who are doing it. You also get people around our age, late 20s, 30s type of thing. But recently, there have also been a bunch of like teenagers who have started entering the hobbies. Maybe it started off as an old person hobby with very few young people back in the 80s and the 90s, and maybe even the early 2000s. But now I think it's really picking up amongst our demographics as well as people who are even younger than us. So that's pretty cool.
It's true that I've been seeing also younger folks joining, and sometimes the parent is the one that was encouraging. So both of them, like a dad and son team, will be doing birding.
And I guess there's also a lot of resources for bird watching now. Like I'm part of this group called the Singapore Birds Project, and we have a whole bunch of resources online to help people identify birds more easily. Like all the birds in Singapore, we have pages for them and things like that. So I think not only is it that bird watching is becoming more famous as a hobby, but there are more resources available for people to learn and more access to it.
Yes.
So you don't have to necessarily, like back in the day, go to a library to borrow the field guide and things like that. Now you can literally just check on your phone what the bird
online
you're looking at is, right? Yeah.
Technology.
So times have changed.
Well, speaking of technology and how things have improved along the years, do bird conservationists and researchers like you guys, right? How do you guys do your bird research? Do you guys like act like detectives and you CSI the birds' movements and you track like, I don't know, bird poop, things like that?
Okay, so there's many ways of doing bird research, right? So there are people who do huge ecological work. which often means like you put up your mist nets. Mist nets are sort of like these really, really fine nets that you put up in the forest in the right lighting in the dark. Understory, it's almost invisible, right? So once we almost caught uncle in a mist net before. Yeah, it was hilarious. The area was actually closed off.
Right.
But someone was naughty and got into the area,
you
right?
got caught.
Then we were like, oh, please don't go there. Then he ran past us.
And then
And then he almost got caught in the mist net. That was very funny. But yeah, so we typically put up mist nets. So like my job is relatively easy. I catch the bird. I take a little, like a tiny, like literally, guys, it's microliters of blood. Okay, like so little.
One drop.
Yeah, like practically a drop. And we bring that blood back to the lab for extracting the DNA and stuff. We let the bird go, which is like, it sounds exciting, but it's also very little actual field work per se, right? Like a lot of our time is spent in the lab and on our computers doing the analyses, which is okay. It means that I get to go to a lot of different places rather than staying for a really long period in one field site. Some people are bird ecologists, so they want to find out about bird movement and stuff like that. So they might put transmitters on birds to track their movements.
Okay.
Yeah. So then they can find out things about like, oh, what is the area that the bird is feeding in? How far does it go? So things like that actually are really important for conservation as well. So the work I do, I find out what species live where. What are the areas that need to be protected to protect all the species in the area, right? But a question that can be answered from like, using your radio transmitter is, what is the minimum area required for this bird to exist? So if I know it needs this kind of habitat, given the total area of the habitat, and I know how much the territory size of each bird is, right? How much of the area it will go through, I can calculate how many birds can be supported by this area, right? So that is a very powerful tool for conservation because it kind of tells me like, oh, this area can support how many birds or how many pairs of birds. This area, how many. And so it can give me a very good numerical sense of things. Not perfect, of course, because a lot of these things are like, relative, but it can give me good answers on that. And then, of course, you have other people who are observational studying, right? Like you do real natural history work, which is something that a lot of people don't do nowadays, which is there is a bird nesting. I'm going to set up a small tent and just watch the bird and see what the parents are feeding the baby. Like things like that.
Don't they have cameras for that?
So you could, but the thing is like what you observe with the camera is never going to be as good resolution. You're never going to be able to pick up exactly the thing in the bill as if you were sitting there with binoculars being like, okay, yes, it is bringing this species of frog, it's bringing this species of spider, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is very, very rarely done nowadays. I think we need more of it. But I know some friends in the Philippines who are doing this kind of work. It takes a long time. Like they're literally in the field 10 hours a day almost. They bring snacks into the field, food in the field. They're sitting in their tent watching the birds.
That's true dedication.
It is. It's crazy.
Can you share with us, some of the interesting birds that you can perhaps find in Singapore other than the usual miners, pigeons and crows, which I know all of us have seen it before. Like how many species do we have here, and do we have like really, really cool birds that the public don't know about?
So I think if we include visitors, migrants and things like that, we have about almost 400 species of birds in Singapore.
Oh, wow.
Like around 400 species of birds.
That's a lot.
Which is a lot, right?
Yeah.
Which is like
for a small country like ours.
We're lucky in the sense that we're along one of those migratory flyways. So a lot of birds in the higher areas, like the high latitude, so like places like northern China, Russia, places like that, it gets really cold in the winter. So winter, they take a little summer holiday. They come to the tropics, right, to chill. And so we have a lot of birds that kind of do that here in Singapore because we're along the way, I suppose.
Yes, visit Singapore. It's a tourist destination, even
not
for
just
birds.
Exactly, not just for people, but also for birds.
Yeah. What are some of the coolest birds in your opinion? Especially if we include the migratory ones that, even for you get really excited and not sure if you have rushed down before to actually capture.
There have been a few times. Okay, so there's a group of birds called pittas.
Yes.
So pittas are like super colorful and every uncle auntie loves to take photo of them. Okay, it's not just uncle aunties. I also love to look at them. There's this one species of pitta that is typically people find in Taiwan, but also in the southern coast of China and maybe northernmost Vietnam where they breed there. It's called the fairy pitta. Perfect name, right? Fairy pitta.
It sounds amazing.
It is. It has a really beautiful coloration. And usually conventional wisdom has that the whole population goes to Borneo to migrate.
Okay.
So like Sabah, Sarawak, Kalimantan, Brunei. But a few years ago, we got one record of fairy pitta. It came to central catchment.
Oh, wow.
Everyone went. Everyone went.
The whole Singapore was there.
Went. The whole Singapore was there. Whole Singapore just packed into the forest. And then there's another bird that turned up in Chek Jawa and Pulau Ubin.
Green broad.
Oh, so there's a few things. Okay, so there's a few things that turn up at Chek Jawa, right?
Okay.
So there's the green broadbill. which is a very cute plush bird. And it's really interesting because like the green broadbill is one of those birds that used to live in Singapore back in Raffles days, right? But then went extinct. And then now we're slowly getting records of it from Chek Jawa. And we're not entirely sure what the reason is. Maybe there's some deforestation happening in southern Johor. Then the birds are like, I can't live here anymore. You find somewhere else. Then they're like, oh, there's a green spot there. And the green spot happens to be Pulau Ubin, right? So maybe that's what's happening. We don't necessarily have evidence for that per se, but that's like my best guess, I'd say. But recently there was this huge hornbill called the white crowned hornbill.
Oh, yes.
That turned up in Ubin. And it's a big hornbill, okay? And
bigger than our Oriental Pied
much
hornbills?
bigger. The Oriental Pied is actually the smallest hornbill in the region.
Oh, okay.
Which is like shocking. One of the smallest hornbills in the region.
Okay.
Probably shares that with the bushy crested hornbill, which is also quite a small hornbill. And I say small in relative terms, right? Because like even the smallest bushy crested hornbil is going to fill up this table comfortably,
yes,
right?
like we'll just stand here and like, whoa.
Yeah, and you just be like, okay. So, but the white crown hornbill is a big hornbill. It's over 1 meter long. So the thing about it that makes it particularly interesting is that it's not a common hornbill. If I had to predict which hornbill would randomly turn up at Chek Jawa at Ubin, right? The first few choices would not be white crown.
Okay.
So this was kind of a surprise for us.
Hello, my name is Steve Lai,
And I'm Teresa Tang, and we are the hosts of CNA Correspondent.
a podcast that takes you to the heart of the work our correspondents do across the globe.
From China's COVID response to the childcare center massacre in Thailand.
And from the fall of Najib Razak to the rise of Anwar Ibrahim as Malaysia's Prime Minister.
We speak to the people at the reporting front lines.
So if you want to know how the biggest global stories unfold, make sure you follow or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, Movin. Now it's time to put your skills to the test with a little surprise game segment that I have prepared for you. So I'm going to play 2 different bird calls. Just 2, alright? And for each call, you will have to guess the species of bird within 5 seconds.
Okay.
And I'm super excited for this one because I actually do send some of the unknown bird calls that I hear when I'm out in nature to Movin, whenever I cannot figure out which bird it belongs to. And he just magically tells me the answer. So Movin, are you ready to wing it?
Let's do this.
Alright, okay. Bird call number 1.
Okay, so this is the Asian koel. This is also the bird that wakes us all up on like lazy weekends when you want to sleep in, right? This is the bird that we hear. So it's the Asian koel. This bird is really interesting because it used to only come to Singapore as a migrant and it was very rare. But it is a nest parasite, which means it lays its eggs in other people's nests. And the bird that it lays its eggs in is actually the house crow.
Oh, interesting. All right. Okay. Are you ready for the second bird call?
Okay. This one is the straw-headed bulbul, which is basically the flagship species of bird conservation in Singapore.
Is it? Oh, I'm surprised that you managed to get both correct.
Yeah, they're like, this one has a super distinctive call, and oftentimes when you hear the full call like we did, right, it's actually 2 birds going at it.
Oh, okay.
It's not just 1 bird. So the 2 birds are so well coordinated, it just sounds like one song.
Yeah, it sounds like one
melody. But actually
wow.
it's a male and female. Their pair bond so strong, right? It's true love, guys. And it's critically endangered globally. But in Singapore, it's doing well because we have such little poaching pressure that the birds are still around. And our best guardians are all the auntie uncle who walk in the park and will just, pauto if they see anyone.
I mean, you can't even make a noise because they'll be like, shh.
Exactly.
Okay, so right now we have a little bonus bird call for you because you're so good at it.
This one is kingfisher. Right?
Yes.
So this would be the stock-billed kingfisher.
Oh
which
my
is
goodness, you even know which kingfisher.
Which is the biggest kingfisher in Singapore and one of the bigger kingfishers in the world. This one in particular is like a mangrove reservoir type species around like large bodies of water. If you see a big kingfisher with a brown head and like a big red bill,
like
that's
a pinkish
this guy.
bill.
Yeah, that's this guy.
It was my favorite bird. It's so cute.
It is.
Like,
I think
the beak is disproportionately bigger than the rest of his
I
body.
love it. I love birds that look disproportionate. It's like the best.
Like, you guys are cute. And while we're on the topic of bird calls, I've personally come across birders that sometimes play bird calls on their phones to attract a particular species of bird that they want to photograph. Some birders even feed these wild birds illegally just so they can get a good shot. So do you know how all of these actions will affect the bird's natural habitat or even behavior?
Okay, so this is a complicated question.
Oh.
Because I think the answer to whether it's ethical or not can be determined on where in the world this is happening. Right?
Okay.
So like in
Okay.
Singapore, the birds are fairly well protected. They have ample food, they have ample resources. No one's going out shooting the birds, right? And the reason for this will become more apparent when I explain it a bit further. So is it a good idea to feed the birds in Singapore? Probably no. But there are other parts of the world where, for instance, people hunt birds, right?
Right.
People hunt birds, the birds are very shy. So in many parts of Southeast Asia, for instance, where there is quite a strong bird hunting culture, not just for food, but for the pet trade and stuff like that, where people set up hides to which bird watchers pay for to go, and they
Okay.
feed birds there.
Uh-huh.
And the birds there are comfortable, and you can get really, really, really rare species coming out. And so what this does is that it can instill goodwill in the people in the area, knowing that like, hey, there is some revenue, there's some money coming in from these people paying, so I'm less likely to hunt the birds. Perhaps it isn't in the best interest of that one bird individual that is always coming there feeding. But in a sense, the setting up of these hides, the feeding of these birds actually protects a much bigger ecosystem or much bigger set of birds than that, right? Because oftentimes when you have bird watchers coming to an area, you need someone will have a small homestay so they can stay there. Someone opens a small restaurant so that people can eat. So you really start this whole revenue thing that spills over to other people than just the person that's managing this bird feeder, for instance.
It becomes like a form of sustainable livelihood
Exactly,
for these people, and they
exactly.
get to protect the entire ecosystem.
Exactly. So it's a in the big picture type of things. Yeah, maybe it's not too bad.
So how has the birding community or people who do birding as a hobby contributed to scientific research of birds and towards bird conservation as a whole?
I love this question,
Oh my
especially in the
goodness. Tell us
Singaporean
all
context,
about it.
right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of the civilian people who are involved in a lot of these consultations, like the EIA consultations, or even like in working groups. So working groups are sort of like groups that are of people with expertise brought together to work on specific projects. So a lot of the people in the bird working groups per se tend to be people who have bird watched for a long time because they have a lot of experience like documenting what the birds do, where they live, what they eat,
And they
what
might
they're
not
about in
be
Singapore.
scientists themselves,
They
right?
may not be scientists
Yeah.
themselves, but the thing is like bird watching, especially if you're like super hardcore about it, the observations you make lend themselves very well to science as a whole, you know.
Okay.
So actually like there's this whole thing called eBird in the world, which is set up by this lab in Cornell University, where people just make lists of what birds they see and they tag it to a location and they upload the list to the thing. So it's this massive repository of bird watchers sending in data, and then actually as scientists we can use that data to make sense of where the birds found, how abundant they are. And because people have been uploading historical lists from the 80s as well, right?
Oh, wow.
We can even track, are the birds
Okay.
as common then as they were now? Are they more common now?
Where
What
are they
has
moving
changed?
towards?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this area used to have a lot of this species, but now no more. So things like that. So of course, the caveat here is that these sightings need to be managed properly. Cannot be people just submit rubbish lists, right? Just like nonsense birds, like don't even exist there, miscount and everything, right? So every country has a moderator.
Oh.
Yeah, an organization that moderates and stuff. So of course, depending on the country, right, some moderators are of course better than others. For example, like in Malaysia, this one of the moderators is Dave Bakewell, and he's like amazing. So depending on the regions, the quality of the eBird data
Okay.
it like differs quite a bit. Yeah, but under good moderation, it can really be a powerful tool for science, and it's made possible by all of these people who are just bird watching, you know, like for fun.
That's amazing.
Right.
Just like how a regular citizen can contribute. It's basically citizen science, and it does have a very big impact in terms of bird conservation.
Exactly. And the thing is, it feels like fun. Like, you know what you mean? Like you're doing it, you're bird watching for fun. You're not like, I am here to count the number of birds because it is a bird census or whatever, right? It's just me doing it for fun. And then I'm already going to make a list anyway. I might as well just put it
contribute to
online.
science.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of fun that way.
But I'm sure, during your bird conservation journey, you've probably faced many challenges, especially in your work protecting these birds. So what is one conservation issue or challenge that keeps you up at night? That, if you could, you would snap your fingers and that issue would be eliminated immediately.
Okay, so this is quite contentious, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I'll give you my honest thoughts on this.
All
so
right,
basically,
all right.
in Southeast Asia, right, in the region as a whole, songbird keeping is a big deal, right?
Oh, it is.
So that has often resulted in a lot of birds being trapped from the wild and being kept in cages. And if you go to some of these massive bird markets, the scale of it can be quite terrifying, right? Like there's so many birds, and many birds have gone to the brink of extinction because of it. And if I could snap my fingers, I would change that. But I think
Okay.
the other thing that bothers me about it is like the songbird keepers, right, are some of the people who know birds the best. And you can tell that they really love birds. You know?
Okay.
They love birds so much. I mean, that's why they're keeping the songbirds, right? And in many cases, these things are culturally important.
Yeah.
Songbird keeping is culturally important. So how do we sensitively work through this, right? You can't just tell people, stop
I'm going to
keeping
take away
birds.
your birds.
Yeah,
You
stop
just live
keeping
with
birds,
it,
right?
yeah.
Like, or just gonna insist on having these laws, because laws are only powerful if people respect them and follow them. If you set a law that you know people are not gonna follow, then is a waste of time, number one. And number two, it means that subsequent laws that you make are going to have less and less power, because people are just going to be like, I don't have to follow if I don't agree with it, right? So it comes to a point like, how do I get this set of people, these bird keepers, who actually genuinely love birds, right? They take care of their birds, they care about their birds. And in fact, of course, it's sad to see the birds in a small enclosed space, but you know, in terms of their basic needs being met, right? Many of these birds in cages that are being kept by good songbird keepers have more of their needs met than many birds in the wild. So how do you convince people who love birds so much that the birds would be better off in the wild? Right? So of course, in the dream world, we would convert all songbird keepers to bird watchers, right?
Okay.
And then we have an army of bird watchers insisting on forest protection and conservation and things like that. But life's not so easy. It's complicated. And there are many layers to it. They love birds, but there's also cultural context to it. There's also like the sense of not necessarily understanding what the ramifications of the trade are and things like that. So a lot of it is education, a lot of it is talking to people, and a lot of it is like coming up with creative ways to tackle these issues.
Thank you so much for that, Movin, because I think you've shared both sides of the issue. Like, these people are not necessarily, they have ill intentions.
Yeah. In fact, they have good intentions, right?
They just love something so much, and it's, it's difficult for someone of that age, if it's like an older folk, to change its mindset.
And it's very easy to write people off, I think.
Yeah.
But conservation is really about active applied empathy and trying to understand where this person is coming from, because you don't want to paint people as good guys and bad guys, right? You want to paint them as people.
Everyone works together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you want to be collaborative about things, you just can't cast people as villains, right? They have to be fully fleshed out human beings with complex motivations.
It's empathy not only to the nature and animals, but to humans as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of like the reason why I keep doing this, right? Because we're extroverts, we like understanding people, and that's kind of part of the job, I think, of being a conservationist.
Well, that's a nice wrap up to our conversation. And thank you so much, Movin.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I had so much fun. This is just like old times.
Just like old times. We'll catch up soon.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. If you've always found yourself a little more than just fascinated with birds, perhaps you may want to consider being a birder just like Movin. So thank you to our guest, Movin, and thank you to everyone for tuning in as well. We hope you have enjoyed this episode, and do remember to like and subscribe to this podcast so that you will know when a new episode drops. You can also leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and tell us what you think of this episode. The team behind this podcast is Jacqueline Chan, Sai Ye Win, Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, and Crispina Robert. Once again, I am Kong Man Jing, signing off.
Did you miss your deadline to renew your Medicaid coverage? You can still send your completed annual review form to Healthy Connections Medicaid. You may be assigned to another health plan, but you can ask to come back to First Choice within 60 days of renewed Medicaid eligibility. It's your family. It's your choice. First Choice is the right choice. Renew and choose us. Visit selecthealthofsc.com/renew to learn more.